This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. The podcast features conversation for musicians of all types and genres, a curation of expertise intended to help all musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love, make music. Greetings, my friends and fellow musicians. This is Robanzo, aka Roberto. This episode of the Unstarving Musicians podcast features another former bandmate and friend, Neil Schnell. Neil is a gigging touring machine who performs solo shows as well as shows with Dallas-Fort Worth favorites Velvet Lovebox and the Lanny Flowers Band. We talk about his published work, his views on selecting collaborators, how musical self-indulgence has been a good thing for his career, and how a gig for a Dallas Stars Hockey Club event changed everything for one of his bands. He's one of the kindest and most talented guys I know. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Neil Schnell. Neil, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this. How have you been, by the way? It's been a little while since we've actually spoken, or since I've heard your voice.
Just carrying on, I suppose.
The life of a musician.
Just working life of a musician,
We met in the 90s, and a fateful evening when I was performing a final show with a band I was playing in that I really did adore. Neil and a couple of his friends were there, and I was playing drums, and we stayed in touch, and I ended up playing in a cover band with Neil and a couple of mutual friends for quite a while, and then just watch Neil continue to do what he does. We're going to talk about some of that on this episode, so we'll cover some of your original work, your continued gigging, relentless gigging, your current band or bands, and some of the touring stuff you've done, and we'll see what else. There are a couple other things non-music related I want to ask you about too. But I was pleasantly surprised only recently, and only because I bothered to look, that Daddy's Soul Donut, one of your bands from a good number of years back, actually had its music published on some of the music services and on CD Baby. I happen to be a subscriber of Google Play, so I was even more pleasantly surprised to find it there and was listening to it again today. I'd heard, I believe, all of those tracks in the past. Really cool stuff. When did you guys actually make it widely available online? It looks like it was a lot more recent than when it was actually recorded, and was that fun to do?
Yeah, it's been within probably about the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years, I suppose. I'm not exactly sure. It may have been a little bit longer than that, but that was entirely spearheaded by our guitar player, Jim Kisselberg. He got in touch with me and said, "Hey, I want to do this. I'd really like to get that out there. Do you have a problem with it?" And of course, why would I have? I don't have a problem with that at all. So he actually, I believe most of that came through CD Baby, and they facilitated the iTunes and Spotify and so forth.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize that that they actually help out with that facet of it. Although I did have a conversation with Jim Kisselberg recently, as you may have heard, and he did talk a little bit about it. I think that I seem to recall that he had a little bit of stuff he had to do perhaps on the iTunes side, but that's cool. So CD Baby actually helped push it out there to some of the music service channels for you guys?
Yeah, I believe what he told me at the time was that there were different ways to go about it, but CD Baby in particular sent X amount of physical copies of the CD, and that they would then handle the streaming licensing and whatnot. So since the band's been defunct for 17 years, I suppose, we're not worried about really making anything off of that, and you don't make much off of that anyway. But it's more important, like, hey, if somebody comes across it and likes it, awesome. To me, it's really just get the music out there. If suddenly there's this giant demand for it or something, well, then I guess we'll figure out if we're going to get together and play at that point. But I think it's kind of cool because over the years, you'll have people say, "Oh man, I lost my CD," or "Man, I wish I could have heard that band." It's like, well, you know what? You actually can. Here you go. It's right there.
Well, my wife and I, Sammy, as you know, were fans of the band, and again, just having recently realized it was available, I was going over a few tracks this morning, as a matter of fact, and I was thinking to myself, Sammy would probably really love to hear this one evening when we have our quality time in the evenings in the kitchen together. So I usually crank on some music, so we'll probably be doing a little bit of that. So for those of you who have not heard of the band, and as Neil said, they've not played together for a long time, but the name of the band again is Daddy's Soul Donut. One other question on that, I don't know that I remembered, or well, I want to say I may have forgotten this, but it came to my attention in talking with Jim that much or most of the material, maybe all of it, was a bit of an archive of songs that you had put together initially. Is that accurate? Did I have that right? Did you pen most of that stuff in the beginning?
No, I mean, yes and no. In particular, the song Blind I had written several years before, and it just kind of messed around. That actually kind of was used as my test balloon as I would try and figure out who I wanted to write with. I was pretty careful about putting the band together. I'd seen so many original bands get together, spend a whole lot of time and a lot of effort in writing songs, and then they would break up after 2 or 3 gigs. You know, we were all in our 20s, so that's a pretty common story at that point. And that particular song just kind of kept hanging around until Brandon got a hold of it and kind of gave it that little triplet beat that's going on throughout, and it just kind of went from there. The rest of them, as you remember, you and I were playing together, and I was kind of writing a little bit during that time, and then I basically took about a year off after Rain ended, and Brandon was playing in Lookout, and I took about a year off and just kind of hung out in my apartment with a 4-track and just got a few songs going, and then we got a rehearsal going, and the rest of them just kind of came out of that. So I'd say I probably had maybe 6 or 7 either complete songs or pretty well-formed ideas going into those first rehearsals.
Okay. For those listening, Brandon is the drummer and also a fine vocalist with Neil's current band that we're going to talk about, but he was one of the members of Daddy's Soul Donut. And Lookout that we mentioned is a long-time popular cover band in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and beyond, and Rain was yet another cover band that Neil and I worked in. Well, let's jump around for a sec.
The bands are stacking up.
I know.
Like cordwood.
I'm telling you. So Velvet Love Box, that's one of your current projects, and
Yes.
You guys have been playing together for a long time. I was looking over the bio perhaps for the first time, and I don't know how familiar you are with it because maybe it was written a really long time ago, but you guys kind of you're a trio that strips away a lot of the amplification. Not that it's void of amplification, but you strip away a lot of the amplification. It's what I like to call semi-acoustic and hand drumming, a lot of vocals. I see it was born out of the same place, a club called Bronco Sports Bar, which is the same place I met you, ironically. Yes. And you guys have been playing together for how many years?
In August, it will be 20 years.
Amazing. So when I was thinking about that today, even though we've already touched on a couple of projects that weren't nearly as long-lived, it occurred to me that you personally are, at least from my perspective, you're very good at carefully putting things together musically and getting full enjoyment out of them and personally sticking with them. So I've heard other musicians mention that, keeping bands together, any kind of act together can be a challenge. What do you think, just in the case of Velvet Love Box, what has been the secret sauce to you guys being together for 20 years and it looks like maybe another 10 or 20, but yeah, how have you personally seen that as happening? What do you do to help contribute to that?
Well, like you said, all I can really think about is how I approach it. I know at least one common thing that we all feel is that is the material that we choose. I mean, we kind of put our own spin on everything anyway, just out of necessity because of our instrumentation. I'm pretty much the easiest one because I'm still playing an electric bass. I'll use some effects and things like that to fill space. We're only a 3-piece, so if you're covering something that generally was done by a 5 or 6-piece band, you're basically trying to fill as much space as possible. Scott Cloud, our guitar player, plays an acoustic guitar, but then run through some effects and everything. And then, as you mentioned, Brandon Bumpus, our drummer, has kind of over the years gone from a pair of bongos on the stage and some handshakers and things to a fairly elaborate, actually it's very elaborate, hand percussion kit. And, he'll switch off. He'll use like a stick and hand, or, however that works out, whatever works out for a particular song. But because of all that, obviously, if you're covering, say, Alice in Chains, that wasn't done on hand drums. And so your sound is going to be different just by natural, circumstance there. But what we have always done, and the way we started the band, was we'd all played in cover bands. We'd all played all those songs that everybody else played and stuck to, your top 40 or just whatever happens to go over at the bars right at that moment. We made a conscious decision early on to not do any of the things that we were all tired of, to not do any of the things that were cliche or obvious. Unless, of course, it was, if it was cliche, it was because, well, we'd never done it. So why not? I think that has really, basically being self-indulgent and has been very, very key into being able to play this long with the same people. Because, it's just more fun to do that. If you're not enjoying what you're playing, it's now looking back on it, if you're not enjoying what you're playing, it's kind of pointless. I've got a lot of friends who make a whole lot more money than I do going out and doing corporate gigs, and that's great if they can do that. I know myself, and it would make me miserable, and I wouldn't be able to do it for very long. But aside from that, over time, it's 20 years. It's 20 years with the same three guys, which is really kind of odd to say out loud, because that is pretty remarkable. I don't know of a whole lot of other bands who have any kind of similar circumstance. There's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of letting someone work through a tough time, or them working, with you through a tough time in your personal life or anything else, or, you just kind of over time, how it is, certain things certain subjects to avoid, or certain situations that you can see kind of coming that are going to be a problem. So you just kind of avoid it.
Right.
You're dealing with long hours, loading in and out. Generally, there's alcohol involved. These can all certainly devolve into a bad situation, and bands break up. Basically, there were a lot of things that were happening then. There was a lot of construction going on around the club. Just our Thursday crowds were just dwindling down. And so we were starting every single week. We were playing Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Every week was always Broncos, and then wherever we were for the weekend. The Thursday nights just became such a beatdown. You would just go in and you would just dread it. And so we found we were snapping at each other and just basically, frustrated. And when we decided to give that up, it was a really, really good decision at the time. I mean, obviously there are things we miss about those gigs because they were a lot of fun sometimes. But Brandon, I think, said it best. He said, these are the kind of gigs that break up bands. It's like, if you've got something that's just going to frustrate you, then just don't do it.
How long have you guys been doing that gig?
We did it for 16 years straight.
For those listening, Broncos is a venue that is in the Hurst, Euless, Bedford area. Are they in, actually, which city are they in today?
They're in Hurst.
They're in Hurst. So, I'm sorry, continue. That's a long time.
Yeah. It's a long time. Well, I mean, we started the band there, and it was originally going to just be a little three-piece, just a jam. It was just supposed to be, people come in, hop up with us, and we'll just play some songs and whatnot. And after a couple of weeks, just nobody was coming in and doing that. No one was sitting in. They were just sitting back and watching us. And we, about 6 months in is when we finally decided, okay, let's give this thing a name, and we're never going to play anywhere else. We'll just do this. And it was just a side project of, as you said, before, Daddy's Soul Donut. It was a way for me to get my voice warmed up for the weekend, and I was playing guitar in Daddy's Soul Donut, so it was a way for me to keep my bass chops up. So yeah, that went on for a few years like that. In 2000, when DSD called it quits, then Velvet Lovebox had an opportunity to go play for the Dallas Stars hockey club out at Reunion Arena, just little side band out on a patio. And from that one gig, everything else came. We started fielding offers left and right and just started playing so much that Brandon and I, who had every intention of starting another original band immediately, found ourselves with no time and way too much money coming in really to ignore. So we put those plans on hold, and
16 years later.
16 years later, yeah. Here
so this brings me to another question, which I feel is an important one. But do you have plans to record an album, either of your own or a collaborative original project again?
I do, absolutely.
Cool. I think the world needs it. You have a fantastic voice.
Well, thank you. That's really kind. I actually just recently made an investment in some recording gear that I hope to have up and running within the next week or so, with that goal particularly in mind.
So on that note, 2 questions. I think one is a quick answer. Well, maybe not. What made you decide to invest in your own gear, knowing that you have some guys around you, some of whom you hang out with regularly, that could have helped you with that facet of it? And what gear did you specifically invest in?
Well, actually, they're all tied together. I have always wanted to get to a point where I had compatible studios set up with different friends, and in particular with Lanny, the Aaron Avenue studio that we generally have at least access to at different times. And they have a ridiculous amount of wonderful outboard gear and vintage guitars, amps, drums. They have a drum set that's already there, all mic'd up. They run Pro Tools. Pro Tools, as you know, is not a terribly inexpensive thing. I've always bounced from audio workstation to audio workstation, and in the hopes of finally getting to that point. And so finally, I just dove in. I bought my first Mac.
Nice.
I have Pro Tools and a really fantastic audio interface in the Universal Audio Apollo Twin, which is just, if you happen to look it up, it is really an amazing piece of equipment.
I believe that specific piece of gear has been discussed on another episode already. I am definitely going to do that. So it's called the UA Apollo Twin?
Yes.
Okay.
And the particular one I have is the Mark II, and that is because they upgraded the preamps to match the rest of the Apollo line, the rest of the rack mount line, as well as the ability to have the quad processing on board.
Have you had a lot of hands-on experience with recording like you're about to get into?
Not a great deal. I mean, I've been running sound for 20 some odd years, and I've done, again, some recording here and there. Mostly what I'm looking to do, at least in the very near term, is getting the idea down, demoing things out, and then taking that session over to the Aaron Avenue studio or to another studio, a friend of mine who lives very close, who also runs Pro Tools and has decades of recording experience.
So you'll work on the basic tracks and then possibly get with one of these 2 resources, Aaron Avenue or your friend, or are you going to do that up front to just get a little sort of head start on like the learning curve?
Yeah, so basically I'm going to just kind of get some things and I'm going to take them elsewhere, and then we'll lay drums on and do things like that, and then I'll be able to bring them back here to work on mixing and things like that. And I intend to utilize the expertise of my friends as well. If I'm just not finding what I'm looking for, I'll take it to somebody else and let them do it. But it's that portability that I've been trying to get to. It's that ability to really work things out at different locations and get the best possible product, rather than having to jump through hoops of hey, can you come over here? I use this and nobody else uses this, and it just becomes a mess. If you're using the industry standard, it just really makes things so much easier.
So I asked all those questions about recording. I know that a lot of people that will listen to this are contemplating setting up home studios or whether they want to do that. And I myself have decided, I'm basically living in a rural town now in Panama, as you know, and there are musicians here, not a lot of them. So until we may move to an area in the future where I'm back around a larger number of musicians. So point being where I would be able to gig more regularly. But it occurred to me, there's something I've always wanted to do, that this is the time to do it, which is to build out a home studio basically for recording drums and collaborating with my friends abroad, perhaps with yourself or other people in the future. So anyway, it's good. Thank you for sharing all that stuff. I look forward to sort of talking to you more about that in the future and what kind of things you learned, because I'm learning a lot from conversations like this one over the past few weeks, but I'm a real rookie at the same time, so it'll be fun learning experience.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm still pretty much a rookie at it, but again, I've got plenty of, I've got at least 3 different people I can ask very technical questions to, and 2 of them, absolutely, I trust their ears as well, as far as, helping to maybe bring something out that I'm not hearing. Or
you mentioned Aaron Avenue Records, and there is, let me see if I can find, there's another name I wanted to ask you about. Well, I remember Aaron Avenue Records from when I was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. What is your working or friend relationship with Aaron Avenue, and tell me just a little bit about them?
Well, I guess technically it would be Spider Pop Records now.
Okay.
Which is under the Pecci Music Group, and Aaron Avenue is still there. Aaron Avenue was the record label that put out the Velvet Love Box EP that we did in 2003.
Is that, by the way, available anywhere for download or purchase? Or
it's certainly available for purchase from their website, and I think I may have a few copies laying around. It's not really anything that we pushed, recently. I mean, we certainly did then. In fact, we were presented at a couple of years ago at our reunion show. We were actually presented with a plaque. It is certified sandpaper, but we were the first act on the label to actually pay back in full the cost of recording and everything. So I'll take that.
And that means that they kind of have had at least a traditional model of fronting their acts, some of the funds to get the project going in hopes of recovering.
Right.
And this is Velvet Love Box, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So is this the same label that Lanny Flowers is affiliated with?
Yes, he's on Spider Pop.
Okay. And Lanny Flowers, for those listening, is a Dallas-Fort Worth artist. He's been around for a while as an individual musician. Anyway, I don't know how long, you can tell us a little more about how long the Lanny Flowers band has been together, but I saw you guys in San Francisco. I bet it's been at least 5 years now at Hotel Utah.
Right.
And you were on a Pop Something tour. You can refresh my memory on the name, but it was a great show. Are you still working with Lanny, or what's going on with him?
Yes, I've been working with Lanny now for, I guess it's coming up on 7 years maybe. I'd actually have to go back and look, but yes, he does what's called power pop, which I didn't even know that was a thing until I was till I was in the band. Basically, think Cheap Trick, Badfinger, Jellyfish,
Matthew Sweet.
Matthew Sweet, absolutely, in that kind of vein. So yeah, it's really a lot of fun to play. It's outside of my normal comfort zone, or at least it was at the time. Just these very structured songs with these great harmonies and these really interesting chord changes, and yeah, very, very much stuff I liked to listen to, but it never really sat down and tried to get into playing and understanding the structure of.
Well, you guys were fantastic, and I got to hang out with you for a little bit before the show, and I loved the air of confidence that the band had, and when you went on stage, it was rightly earned. I think, as you had put it, it was a bit of a wall of sound, and it was quite good.
Yes, yeah, it's not a small sound. It's very different. I mean, Love Box is 3 guys trying to make as much noise as possible. Lanny Flowers is, 5 guys. It's almost relaxing to be in that situation because there's so much sound. You can really kind of pick and choose your moments a little bit more.
Sure, everyone's got to leave some space, and that's what makes it what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was cool. So you were touring with Lanny, not the first time, and maybe not the last time. Well, first of all, where did that tour take you guys? Like, where all did you play as far as traveling goes? And have you done other tours outside of the Lanny Flowers band tours?
Not really. The majority of my touring has been with Lanny Flowers. We tend to shadow a traveling power pop festival called International Pop Overthrow.
Is that still going on?
It is, as a matter of fact. I believe they are about to have their LA show coming up fairly soon.
Will you be doing one of those again?
We will. Right now, we are in the studio album. So we're probably about 6 or 7 tracks into that. We're going to try and, I think, record 14 or 15 songs and then kind of pick which ones he wants to put on. But we're about halfway through the recording process, or at least the initial tracking. So hopefully, very hopefully, I should say, when the next season starts up, which would be next February or March, that we'll be ready to roll out with a whole new album worth of to go out and promote, because IPO has taken us literally to many countries. I mean, we've gotten to, I think on that trip, may have been that trip, it may have been a different one, but we drove out to San Diego and we played our way from San Diego to LA to San Francisco to Seattle. And when you're in those regions, then you book elsewhere on the days in between and the weeks in between. So tried to stay very busy, but we've also been fortunate enough that twice we've been able to go over and play the IPO festival in London, Liverpool, and Stockholm.
How cool. So for those of you listening, internationalpopoverthrow.com, it will be in the show notes. Did you say that there are plans to do that festival tour again with IPO?
Yeah, I believe that's definitely in the works. We actually have a really great crowd that comes to see us out in the LA area. We've got a really good Eastern Seaboard crowd. Our New York shows and Boston shows the last several times have been very well attended.
And this is for the Lanny Flowers band specifically, or for?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, for Lanny Flowers, and then and actually the 2 times we've been to Liverpool, which is the largest of the IPO shows, which actually takes place at the Cavern Club.
Oh, wow.
And so the Cavern Club and the Cavern Pub across the street. Among 3 stages, there's the old stage, which is the iconic one that the Beatles, played on with the archway over you, and then the newer side, which is a much larger venue, and then the Cavern Pub is a kind of across Matthew Street from that. But it runs for, I believe, like a week and a half, just nonstop of bands on all 3 stages, just 30 minutes at a pop, 15-minute change. But yeah, we've had fans come in from Spain and other parts of Europe just specifically to come and see Lanny.
That's cool. And I'm glad that the power pop genre still lives. I actually really like a lot of the stuff that came out of that. Well, I don't want to let us run completely through our time together before I ask you a couple other things.
Sure.
Do you or have you, not your fault, do you or have you given lessons, bass, guitar, or voice in all this time that you've been playing?
I haven't. Okay. I've had different people ask, and I usually turned it down. I've accepted a couple of them, and then it just never materialized. I don't even know what I know, so I don't know how I would impart that on someone else.
Some people really think, like, I've discovered, like, teachers, and some of us don't. And I'm one who doesn't, as far as drums go. And then, there's the whole thing of doing people the service of being able to teach them the formal aspects of it, which I feel like I wouldn't do justice to. And then there are those that just, love to teach. And an amazing number, I'm learning, I'm sure you know too, an amazing number of musicians at various levels of careers or popularity, giving and taking lessons. So, and on that note, were you entirely self-taught, or did you have a little bit of formal education?
Very little bit. On bass, I'm completely self-taught. Guitar, I took a few classical guitar lessons early on, and then I was enrolled in junior college and took a couple of semesters of classical guitar. But really, once I put a band together and started getting out and playing, that was what I wanted to do anyway. So, yeah, I had not really delved terribly deep. I wasn't very good. I'm much quicker by ear, and so just the sheet music tended to slow me down, which I regret now because I'd really like to have that skill set. But again, I felt like I was coming to things really late. So many of my friends, started playing guitar or drums, when they were 10 or 11 or what have you, or had been playing guitar since they were 13 or 14. I bought a guitar when I was 17, but I didn't decide that I wanted to be a musician until I was 20. So I felt very much behind the 8 ball. And I guess still do, actually, in some ways. You got these guys that oh, I remember this song. I learned this when I was 16, and they just sat in their room and they learned, just classic rock song after classic song or after whatever. And I don't have that back catalog. Everything I have learned has been, necessary and for a specific purpose of going out and performing it.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And is your continued, sort of music education, has it been strictly through performing and your bands, or have you ever taken a break or do you take ever take informal breaks when you're with other players to sort of learn some new stuff?
I observe. I've always been really good at critical listening to something. What is that? How is that working? And sometimes, there are some friends I can ask. Alan Davis in particular is very, very good at knowing exactly what he just heard. His mind just works that way.
And Alan is with Spider Pop Records, right?
Yes, and he also plays keyboards and rhythm guitar in the Lanny Flowers band.
Fine musician.
Very much so. Very much so.
I haven't talked with him a lot about it, but in the years that I've been acquainted with Alan, he has struck me as a guy who's got a really good ear and knows music theory, at least relatively well, if not very well. It's interesting that your responses to this, I'm always curious about the education aspect of different musicians that I've talked to, and these are people that are doing different things. Some of them are more into recording than they are performing, and I'll be talking to players of all different types, but the education question always generally comes up because I'm curious, and some of them have a lot of formal education and can't even really quantify how it's helped them, but in the same breath will say things like, they have played with great players that they couldn't tell you what they're playing. They just do it really well. But you are a phenomenal musician, so it's I assume it would be refreshing for some musicians to hear that in spite of not a lot of formal education, if they take the time to hear you, if they haven't already, they'll see how possible it is to really do great things with or without it. I ran across a fantastic, I want to call it a painting, I want to call it a rendition of you on Facebook recently that I think was done by Chris Bellamy. Is that correct? Do you know what I'm talking about?
That was actually a filter.
It was originally a photograph and then it's treated?
Yeah.
As opposed to painting. Well, it's great. And I brought it up because this show's going to have a show notes page on it, and I thought that might be a wonderful image to use. So I will.
Yeah, I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, well, I'll assume it would be courteous of me to reach out to Chris and make sure he's okay with that. But I'll be sure to do that. I think it's a great piece and a great likeness of you.
Well, thank you.
So what is up next in the coming weeks or months? What project are you most looking forward to? I'm guessing maybe recording in there, but what else is going on, or what is the focus right now?
Recording is definitely on my mind at the moment. I've got, just pages and pages of ideas that I really need to start getting into. Also, just here on my phone, I've got notes and voice messages and things like that have just been stacking up for the last several years that I'd really like to start diving into. But aside from that, coming up in August, we have the Velvet Love Box 20-year anniversary.
Nice.
So we're in preparation for that. It's always a pretty big blowout show, and certainly for 20 years, we hope there's still some people left who want to come see that.
Where's that going to be?
That'll be at Broncos.
Cool.
We figure that's the most appropriate venue for it.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic, I'm sure.
As we get closer, obviously, continuing the recording with Lanny, because we're all very anxious to get back out on the road. It's been about a year and a half since we traveled. We've done a few shows here and there locally with Lanny, and I think we actually went up and did a show in Nashville in the spring. I'd have to look, but I think we did. And that's all great, but we really like being a lot busier with that. And then there's the annual show that we do at my in-laws bar, the Tanstoffel Pub here in Arlington. The night before Thanksgiving. This will be the 6th year that we will do a reenactment of the band's Last Waltz.
Ah, I heard about this. And is it the same lineup that you've had for the most part?
It varies. 4 musicians to 34.
You've had 4 to 34?
24 to 34.
Okay. So it is, it's kind of a theme night jam with a little bit of rehearsal maybe.
There's one rehearsal the night before.
Yeah, that's cool. How many musicians are typically on stage at once?
It varies from song to song, but I know on the finale, I Shall Be Released, we actually get everyone who played up on stage all at once. But
I'm laughing because every time you get to a number, the voice track just goes.
Doesn't
It's not your fault. So interesting. I did hear about this very recently in conversation with Jim. Now that you and I are talking about it, it makes me realize there's a project that happens in San Jose, California that I got involved in through a friend that is a theme night monthly thing where they'll do things like they might have a Rolling Stones theme night. They may have a garage rock theme night. They may have a Summer of Love theme night. And there's a fairly large crew of musicians who have varied interest in playing on the different ones. You'll have a house band that's generally about 4 to 5 guys, and then various other people coming up. There's 2 rehearsals generally, so it sounds kind of similar. And I bring it up because these are super fun, first of all, but like the sort of blues jams or the open jams are such a great way to meet other musicians. Have you seen that for yourself, and have you seen that you've been part of connecting other musicians together who end up staying in touch, working together?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say that the Last Waltz project every year has been the most rewarding thing I've done. The first year, as we got to the finale, I looked around and I couldn't believe how many of the musicians that were teared up.
Yeah.
It was just this great. We had no idea if the entire thing was just going to collapse in on itself at any moment, and everybody just played beautifully.
And how many years has it been going now?
This year will be number 6.
Wow, that's amazing. It's got to be so much fun. And for those who are listening who have no idea what the reference is, The Last Waltz is in reference to, it would be the movie, the final performance of a band called The Band. And I don't recall that event took place in the 70s, yes?
Yeah, I believe it took place in 70. It's either 72 or 74, and it came out in 74 or 76. There was a gap there.
I thought it was much later in the decade, but anyway, it's a really cool movie for those of you that aren't familiar with it. That's called The Last Waltz, that the tribute is apparently based on. Totally non-related to music, but your hometown. You're in Arlington now?
I'm in Arlington now, yes.
Okay. Home of 2 big franchises, the Texas Rangers and the Dallas Cowboys now. How are the Rangers doing? What do you think is going to happen with those guys this year?
Oh, man. They're a team. They've had some struggles. They've had some struggles this season. Man, pitching has just been very erratic. I mean, you put up 9 runs, you kind of expect to be able to hold on to that lead, and they've blown some really large leads. But, it's the All-Star break. I mean, I think we're 3 games out of the wild card slot.
Man, the season has flown by. I don't follow it a lot, but it goes by so fast. And are you excited or skeptical for the Cowboys?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose at this point, I always just I'm not going to be skeptical. I'm not going to be excited. I'm just going to let it.
That's what you have to do if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan. Don't be too emotionally invested, and it'll be okay. Anyway. Yeah, interesting stuff. I had to ask you. So back to music for a second. I always try to ask a little bit about marketing and business. Do you have any takeaways after all these years? Or maybe you don't have takeaways. Maybe you have man, I wish I could figure this out, which would be good to know too, because if chances are I don't have it figured out either, but chances are really good I'm going to talk to someone that's going to help us figure it out. So do you have any takeaways that are either positive or, like I said, things that you wish that you had figured out after all these years that might help other musicians or maybe help them commiserate with you or possibly come forward and go, hey, I can, I have some tips for you?
I've actually been giving this a lot of thought. Also playing another band with a terrific singer-songwriter named Carrie Wolf.
Okay.
Who, accompanied with Lanny, may be the 2, worst self-promoters.
Really? Lanny?
Oh, yeah. Lanny is very bad at it. Now, he has a label behind him that takes care of a lot of that.
That's good.
Yeah, I was just saying that, with social media, it's such a vast resource, but at the same time, it's almost too much information out there. It seems sometimes it's like if I constantly get event invites and I constantly, see people's shows, and I just have gotten to where my eyes just kind of glaze over, and I just doesn't even register unless it's something I see and I'm like, oh, I really want to make sure I go to that. And so I think really, and this is just a complete out of off the top of my head theory at this point. I was actually thinking about this Sunday night. I went over and hung out with Kerry. He bartends at a really great venue in Fort Worth called Lola's.
Okay, I know of it. Yeah.
Which is a really wonderful place if anybody is touring through, and that's a good place to try and play. Yeah,
on a side note, for those of you that are listening, if you've never been to Fort Worth, Texas, is really, in all the years, I've been away from it since 99 as a permanent resident there, but it is a beautiful town. When I go back, what I see is something that's a combination of Austin meets San Antonio sometimes. But anyway, if you get a chance, please go to Fort Worth. Continue.
It really occurred to me that as you get older and have more life going on outside of music, the fundamental things that used to get everybody out to your shows, kind of fall away. And that is be out in the scene, be out, go to people's shows, go and talk to people, because that's where it all comes from. That's certainly how Daddy's Soul Donut was. It's how Velvet Love Box was. I mean, you go out and hang out at the places that you play. You know the staff. They tell people about you. You know other bands. I mean, really, it's just all networking. It's trying to get people out, and the more people that come out, the more friends show up, the more that circle starts to expand. Putting up flyers at places is something that not a lot of people do anymore.
Yep.
And, particularly for a band, like Velvet Love Box, which, we play every single week, and we play 2 or 3 times a week. Now that I'm doing so many solo shows, I mean, I'm playing between 4 and 6 days a week on any given week at this point. And it gets hard to, and across 4 different iterations or groups or whatever. So if I'm putting that much out there, I'm sure people are just, like I said, just glossing over some of it. So for myself, I don't generally do like Facebook event invites. I don't make events because I ignore them all the time. So I assume everybody else does.
As I recall, they became pretty cumbersome to do, although I think
they are.
I think that they are great in that if you have bandmates that will share them, it's pretty effective. But I'm wondering, as we're talking, it's the first time I thought it, but you knew it was going to happen. But I wonder if we're on the cusp of Facebook still having a role for bands that are doing the type of work that you're doing, and perhaps giving way to one of the other social networks or some new medium to help promote. I love all the other stuff that you're saying. I've contended the same, and as do many other musicians, but like networking, FaceTime with other people, going to see other bands, doing those in-venue posters, kind of a lost art, are huge. So
it's hard. It's hard to do because it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of driving, and it's a lot of sacrificing the other things you'd like to be doing, or say in some cases the other things you need to be doing.
Yeah, I will contend too, and maybe you'll appreciate this, is that when you're playing with other musicians, try hard to play with other musicians who can lend a hand to this. Some of them can, and they're good at it, and some of them can or are willing, but they're not good at it. So that helps. But the other thing too that would probably be great for you, because you've been playing so long, you probably have a couple of super fans here and there. They can also probably help fill that void a little bit, just out of sheer love of wanting to see you do well. So you might find help among your closest fans.
You're absolutely right. There's a handful of people that I can always count on. I know they're going to share whatever event I put up. I know they're going to at least click like on something, because, just putting the like up there, the way the algorithm works, you put like, then that shows up in their feed. If they do, now they have the little love thing or whatever, that actually gets even more.
Right.
But you can't just, and again, you can't just, as you touched on, Facebook alone is not going to do it. And Facebook, for the younger fans in particular, is becoming less and less relevant. I actually, my wife, who does promotion for her parents' bar, for instance, turned me on to Instagram, and I have found that basically right now I'm running across, I post on Instagram, which posts to Facebook, which posts to Twitter. So I'm at least running across those 3, and then I also use Bands in Town, because another friend of mine had said that, if you put it on bands in town, then that actually populates. If somebody's following you, it'll populate into their Google calendar.
Nice. Are you finding that helpful so far, or are you still kind of waiting to see?
I really am. Yes, actually.
Cool.
I mean, it's a couple of extra steps. It gets very tedious.
Yeah, but it's probably giving you a fairly big return for the time you're putting in.
I don't know how big of a return, but it's definitely a return. And the other part of that is, get out and play as many new places as possible, even if it seems like something that's not up your alley or the money's not that great. Take a chance. We put together kind of a scaled down version of what we do because the gene pool of clubs gets a little stagnant. Mm-hmm. And so we've been playing some other places, and the payoff from that has been really, really great.
I'm glad to hear that. Have you, I'm sure you have, but I kind of want to hear it from someone else, but do you find, as you mentioned, you're playing a lot, and I know that can be worrisome, like some people are tired of seeing me, but do you find yourself getting a little focusing on certain people for certain venues among your fan base because you know that there are these people that love to come see you at this specific place, maybe with these guys, and then there's this other few people that like this other venue and they love this band or they love seeing your solo shows? Do you find yourself aware of those little sort of microcosms of fans that you have?
Yeah, definitely. I initially, when I started doing solo shows and started playing in these other bands, and I still do promote where all of the members of these various bands are doing things whenever I can. But I thought there would be quite a bit more crossover than there is. But it does tend to be fairly compartmentalized. People go where they want to go, and they go with what they're comfortable with. And then over time, I don't know if you're aware, I started doing solo shows right at about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I hadn't done them in several years and wasn't very good at them back then. I didn't like them. I didn't like playing by myself. I didn't like not having that safety net. But I forced myself to do it this time, and I really actually enjoy it quite a bit. There's a lot of freedom that goes with that. But because of that, I put it up on Lovebox sites. Hey, I'll be playing solo, yada, yada, yada. And I thought that there would be, a decent amount of people who would come out and check it out. And it really was just the people who were at the places I was playing. It was very slow building. And now, almost 2 years in, is whenever I'm starting to get some of those people. And it's because I've been playing solo shows at the places where they've already been seeing the band.
Yeah, right.
And so now some of them are starting to branch out and come to these other things. And then from there, then they're finding out about Carrie and they're finding out about Lanny. And
oh, cool. These projects you're involved in.
It's just a lot slower crossover than I would have expected.
It's a long game, isn't it?
It really, really is. So, I would just say don't get frustrated about that. Just keep doing what you're doing and just be tenacious about it. Preferably not obnoxious about it, because there's that line. So basically, I just put things up. I'll have a couple of clubs. It'll say, I just saw that you posted this and this and this. I said, look, I put it, how many people do you think you're going to come out tonight? And I'm like, I have no idea. If I could control human behavior, I'd be a much richer man, but I can't.
Oh, you're saying the venues will give you a hard time when you're posting too many shows at once?
No. Most of the time they're like, well, why didn't you push, I don't see our, show mentioned, but the one time. It's like, well, it's the same as I mentioned anything else, because you can't just overload and you can't overshadow one club for another.
Yeah.
Now, offline, I will absolutely tell people personally, hey, I really need to get some more people out to this show. You can bring some friends or whatever. But no, I found that just being very even with it. I post the day I post something early in the week saying, here's what's going on this week. I'll post the day of.
Yep.
And that's about it, because, and you share it across as much as you can and get people liking it and things like that. And I found that actually works pretty well for, Gary Wolf shows and things like that. That's a little easier to do because you're not playing nearly as often. You're playing once a month or once every other month. So you can kind of push that a little harder and maybe actually do an event for that, because you want to give people some lead time.
Well, Neil, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I want to be respectful of your time. Where can people find you on Instagram and other places that you hang out if they want to get familiar with where you're playing and your music and so forth?
The best way to find me is either Neil Schnell on Facebook. I have a music page. Okay. Or Velvet Lovebox is actually You can pretty much find everything from there. Velvet Love Box on Instagram, Velvet Love Box on Twitter, Velvet Love Box on Facebook, or velvetlovebox.com.
Okay, cool. And I will put all of that in the show notes. It has been wonderful to catch up with you. I know that we're going to stay in touch. I've had the pleasure anyway of being able to stay in touch a little bit more here lately. I know we're going to try and get together in the not too distant future. So, my friend, thank you again for your time, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you very much. Seriously, this is a really great thing you're doing.
Cool. Hey, this is Robonzo. Thanks so much for listening. Did you know I'm also an author? Check out my book, The Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs: How to Get Booked and Paid What You're Worth Over and Over Again, available on Amazon. And the book is also available in audio format as The Unstarving Musician's Guide podcast. Check it out wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Last but not least, are you a gigging musician, recording artist, songwriter, or touring professional? Perhaps struggling to get your music out to the world? Struggling to get the gigs you want? Pop over to unstarvingmusician.com and sign up for my email list. I'll send you an occasional email with tips, expert advice, music, musician resources, and anything else I come across that might make your journey better and brighter. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.